Thank you for joining another episode of the Scouse Oracle. As always, I appreciate you. If you can hit that subscribe button, it'd be very much appreciated. Today, I'm going to dive into the NHS £37 billion track and trace programme. If you've been following me, you'll know I love to submit a freedom of information request to the government, just asking for that transparency. I did get some responses back, and they did show a transparency problem. Let me get into it, you'll see what I mean. The Department of Health and Social Care, the DHSC, is where I submitted my original requests to. And then you've got another department, the UK Health Secretary Agency. The context behind the requests that I've submitted, you'll explain why I'm pointing out these two departments. The figure of the £37 billion comes from the report by the National Audit Office and Public Accounts Committee. It was the total budget allocated to the NHS track and trace programme over 2 years, from 2020 to 2022. Now, please keep them dates in mind. I'm pretty sure you already know them, but just for clarity, the programme sat within the DHCS, so as I've said before, the Department of Health and Social Care, and it was led by Baroness Dido Harding. It was created to track infections and manage testing during the pandemic, but relied heavily, as we know now, on private companies. Consultancies and management services received around £900 million. And if you've been following me, you'll see I've pointed out them companies: Delight, McKinsey, BCG, Accenture and PwC. The contact centre and tracing contracts such as Serco, Sitel, they accounted for several £billion. The majority of the budget, around 70%, went on testing sites, laboratories and logistics. Local health teams received a much smaller share, despite being the front line of delivery. Now, we have learnt all this through what's been disclosed in the media, and the National Audit Office later said the DHCS could not demonstrate value for money. Some contracts were awarded without competition, and others were extended before any evaluation of performance. It concluded that the programme had achieved less than it promised despite extraordinary levels of funding. So you see, in 2021, the government closed the NHS Test and Trace as a named body and merged it into new UK Health Secretary Agency. So that meant that the contract staff and data all moved over under the UKHSA. However, the procurement and the money trail originated in the DHSC. So bear that in mind. This is why the DHSC responses are saying that they don't hold the data. So I sent my request to the DHSC, which would make sense given what I also have just advised. It would make sense to send them requests there. Now, the £37 billion test and trace programme is one of the largest single public health expenditures in modern UK history. My freedom of information requests show how accountability for that spending has been blurred between the DHSC and the UKHSA. You see, I submitted the responses, and what I got back is the file documents show how two freedom of information responses from the Department of Health and Social Care reveal a copy and paste culture which weakens transparency. Both replies that I got were dated 1 day apart. Now, I submitted them 1 day apart, both to the same department, which was the DHSC. Basically, I asked them, I want to know all of the companies, which you can find on Find Tender, which I did. I found the companies and I listed the companies and I said, basically, is there any more that I've missed? And I want to know for these companies, the contracts, how much they spent, how much when they employed people, how much were the people getting paid, what is being clawed back from them particular companies, were any penalties put in place because they failed to deliver. You see, under each of the requests, they put the same factual error, claiming that the UK Health Secretary Agency, which is the UKHSA, was established in 2001 when it was actually formed in 2021. Now, this is a lot of information, I understand. So what's happened here is I've submitted my Freedom of Information requests and I've submitted 2 different ones. First of all, I asked for copies of all statements or equivalent documents for consultancy contracts within firms, including, as I was saying, I listed the firms that I'd found, and then I advised not limited to. I asked for day rate bands, fee structures used for each contract, including partner, director, senior manager, consultant, the total headcount billed per month by each firm over the duration of the track and trace engagement, any internal correspondence or briefings describing the process. All of this information was submitted in one request, and then under a different request I submitted for information regarding records showing whether any service credits, abatements, penalties and clawbacks were applied under the Test and Trace Contact Centre, contracts with Serco Limited and Sitel. So I concentrated more on the penalty clawbacks. So in one Freedom of Information request, I've basically laid it all out. I've named the companies and I've asked for the penalty clawbacks because it didn't work. So were they charged for it not working? That's what I've asked for in one request. In the other request, I'm asking for all of the information, basically how it was handled, how was the day-to-day process handled. We're talking about major money going to these companies. Where's the oversight of how things are being handled? So they were 2 separate requests going to the same department. Now, as I said before, the spending went to the Department of Health and Social Care. So in submitting that request, one would assume that they are the ones that hold the information. So both responses did come back and advise that they don't hold that information. They don't hold the information we requested. However, you'd like to contact the UK Health Secretary. So they are passing and shifting blame over to the UK Health Secretary Agency, which was developed in 2021. So is that shift in accountability? Well, what happened to all of them documents? Did you, if they been lost, did they go over to the company? Where are they? Because each letter that's come back from the DHSC is saying that they don't hold that information and that responsibility for the track and trace is transferred over. The key issue, though, is they've said that it was established in 2001. Now, okay, that's a typo. It's a human error. But these are 2 separate Freedom of Information requests. The 2 separate documents. So the key issue here is both responses contain an obvious factual error and it's being copied across two templates. So when two freedom of information responses repeat the same incorrect date, it reveals a procedural flaw. The replies were not independently checked. This matters because the Freedom of Information Law requires public authorities to conduct a reasonable search and to respond accurately to each request. Template responses undermine that process and again erode trust in public transparency. So this right here, this highlights how departments can use internal handoffs between the departments, between the DHSC, where we originally submitted the request to, and its own agency, the UKHSA, the redirecting the scrutiny. Although the UKHSA, the one which was established when they wanted to redirect, is legally separate for freedom of information purposes, but it operates under the same ministerial chain of command and funding structure as the DHSC. So they are the same department. If they're under a legal obligation to look as though they are at least trying to pass over some information. So the 2001 typo across both documents acts as a marker of automation and official accountability. Rather than searching the records department from department, they've reproduced a stock answering, shifting responsibility to its own agency. So it shows how transparency can be lost. And the law exists to protect that. So what I've gone and done is requested an internal review from the DHSC, and I've highlighted this. I've highlighted the duplicate error and the lack of specific evidence. And I've also submitted a fresh request to the UKHSA because asking directly for the information relating to the test and trace contracts and the penalties. So if the DHSC fails to respond properly, I'll escalate that to the Information Commissioner Office for investigation, because this case illustrates a wider civic lesson. When departments say we don't hold it and then pass you on to another department, that just shows the lack of transparency. It's creating a paper trail. It's showing the general public whose best interests are they acting on. You know, when you work in an office or any company which holds a HR department and you believe they are there to protect you and your best interests, we all know that they're there to protect the company's best interests, don't we? But the government are meant to work for the people. Where is this clear breakdown? Would this not gain public trust, holding hands up and saying, here's the information, we are so sorry that this happened. We can clearly see the breakdown. This will never happen again. If you didn't apply any penalties to any of these companies, then just tell us. Just say we were unable to, or the contract that we took out was XYZ, therefore XYZ we were unable to claim it back. Just tell us. Why are we creating different departments? And I will circle this back because it's a spider web, and you may have heard of me talking about this before, this spider web. And connecting the dots. And I understand there will be a lot of people out there that say, you know what, can we just, it is what it is. But I feel like people understanding the power in being able to create a paper trail, in being able to prove the lack of transparency. It's something different when you instinctually know that something is not right and that you can't put your finger on it. That is something entirely different, to be able to create an actual paper trail, to be able to connect dots, to be able to have the power to show what is happening within the government, within an establishment that is meant to be there to protect public interest. And people may say, well, complaining to the ICO, whether they might be there just to protect the government, but okay. But we have the power to be able to do and see and connect the dots and go on to do something about it, because history repeats itself. And of course we know that, and sometimes it can feel as though you are shouting into a void. It can feel as though it's not going to make much difference. It can feel as though, well, I can complain, but nothing's going to change. And okay, you can think that, but then you're not going to be able to complain about it because you're not actually doing anything about it. So there's a huge difference here between thinking that your voice doesn't matter, but then knowing that that's where it thrives. That's where situations like this thrive. And if we, let's say 99% agree that maybe, okay, we're not going to get this money back, but we're proving something for future reference. We are able to show, when it comes as well to the digital ID, because I've given a lot of information across on that, when it comes to the digital ID, we can see the steps that are happening because we've seen it happen before. So if we go back and look at the trail of how things can happen, how it can slowly erode trust, and we're giving away our rights, then this is where we need to concentrate. We need to be digging into these contracts. We need to be able to question things. We need to be demanding transparency. And I think when it came to COVID, it was something that it was chaos. It was chaotic. No one can dispute that. And it was like we were getting it from all angles. But when you sit back, when you can calm, when you're collected, when you don't act out of emotion, you can create something which will enable you with the power moving forward to be more knowledgeable when it comes to situations like this. Always, I will keep you updated on the responses that I receive from the review that I've put in. I've asked for an internal review, and let's just keep going, because what would be the alternative to speak up, to take action, to demand transparency, or just continue down a little bit of a slippery slope where we admit defeat? Because that is definitely not on my to-do list. So thank you for listening, guys. Hopefully you tune into another episode, and any comments, any suggestions are always welcome.